Before we get into today's shocking revelation, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more exclusive updates on the Diddy case. Turn on notifications so you never miss any breaking developments. Day 15 of the Sean Diddy Combs trial was supposed to be a procedural day. The prosecution had indicated they would be presenting financial evidence, banking records, contract analyses, corporate structures. The gallery was half empty, with many regular spectators choosing to skip what was expected to be a dry session of technical testimony. That all changed when Marcus Taylor was escorted into the courtroom by federal marshals. Taylor, a platinum-selling artist who had 3 hit albums with Bad Boy Records in the early 2000s before abruptly disappearing from the music scene, hadn't been seen publicly in nearly a decade. His sudden emergence sent reporters scrambling for their phones, and within minutes, the courtroom was filling with hastily summoned journalists and industry observers. Diddy, who had been reviewing documents with his defense team, froze mid-conversation. His attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm as Taylor was sworn in. For the first time in the trial, Diddy's carefully maintained composure cracked visibly. His face flushed, his hands clenched into fists. Security personnel moved slightly closer to the defense table. Taylor took his seat at the witness stand with a quiet dignity that belied his former reputation as one of hip-hop's most energetic performers. Gone were the designer clothes and distinctive jewelry that had once been his trademark. Instead, he wore a simple dark suit, his former flamboyance replaced by a solemn intensity. The lead prosecutor approached. "Mr. Taylor, can you please tell the court about your professional relationship with the defendant?" Taylor adjusted the microphone, his voice steady as he replied. "I signed with Bad Boy Records in 1999. I released 3 albums under the label, before terminating my contract in 2008. And why are you testifying today?" Taylor looked directly at Diddy for the first time. Because what happened at Bad Boy Records wasn't just about music. It was about control, manipulation, and a system designed to exploit young artists. And it's time someone told the truth about it. Before we continue, we must emphasize that the following content comes directly from federal court proceedings. Viewer discretion is advised as we present this information for educational purposes only. Nobody expected Marcus Taylor's appearance. The room transformed instantly from procedural boredom to electric attention. Eyes locked on this man who had once filled arenas but had vanished from public view years ago. No press release had announced his return. No social media hints had prepared anyone. Just this former star now sitting calmly at the witness stand, ready to speak about a chapter of music history that had remained suspiciously undocumented. Until that moment, Diddy had maintained impressive self-control throughout the proceedings. Each day, he arrived in designer suits, projected confidence, occasionally nodded to supporters or whispered to his legal team. But Taylor's appearance triggered something different. Perhaps it was seeing someone who knew intimate details about his business operations. Perhaps it was the realization that an artist who had once been completely under his influence was now beyond his control. Whatever the cause, Diddy's trademark composure visibly fractured as he stared at his former protégé. Taylor wasn't testifying as a celebrity seeking attention or a bitter ex-employee with a grudge. He was there as someone who had experienced the inner workings of Bad Boy Records during its peak years, who had observed its practices firsthand, and who had made the deliberate choice to walk away from fame rather than continue within that system. And when he began to speak, his words carried the weight of someone who had paid a high personal price for his knowledge. Because what Taylor revealed about the contracts, the accounting practices, the control mechanisms, and the systematic exploitation within Bad Boy Records wasn't just disturbing, It exposed an entire business model built on taking advantage of young, often financially inexperienced artists from vulnerable backgrounds. "I want to make something clear from the beginning," Taylor stated, his voice steady but intense. "This isn't about revenge or seeking attention. I've deliberately stayed away from the spotlight for years. I'm here because recent allegations against Mr. Combs reflect patterns I witnessed throughout my time at Bad Boy Records, patterns that affected numerous artists, including myself." The judge nodded, allowing him to continue. The jury seemed captivated by this unexpected witness. Diddy's attorneys huddled together, clearly unprepared for this testimony. "Bad Boy Records presented itself as a family," Taylor continued. "The Diddy public image was one of success, loyalty, and opportunity. The reality behind closed doors was something entirely different. A reality built on financial manipulation, personal intimidation, and a contract system designed to create what I can only describe as modern indentured servitude." It started like any other day of the trial. The gallery was sparse. The atmosphere was subdued. Legal teams organized exhibits related to corporate finance and tax structures. But when Marcus Taylor's name echoed through the courtroom, everything shifted instantly. Reporters straightened in their seats. Phones were raised surreptitiously. Despite the court's restrictions, the energy in the room transformed from procedural tedium to heightened alertness. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting this deviation from the scheduled financial testimony, and Diddy, who had been projecting bored confidence moments earlier, suddenly sat rigidly upright. His attorney whispered urgently in his ear, but Diddy seemed beyond hearing, his eyes fixed on Taylor with an expression that the courtroom sketch artist would later capture perfectly, a mixture of shock, recognition, and unmistakable alarm. Taylor walked to the witness stand with measured steps. No dramatic gestures. No playing to the gallery. His focus remained entirely on the task at hand. "Mr. Taylor," the prosecutor began, "could you tell the court how you first connected with Mr. Combs?" "And Bad Boy Records?" Taylor nodded slightly. "I was performing at a showcase in Atlanta in 1998. I had been building a local following for about 3 years at that point. Mr. Combs was in attendance with several executives from the label. After my performance, I was approached by one of his representatives who said Mr. Combs was interested in signing me." "And what happened next?" "Things moved very quickly," Taylor explained. "I was flown to New York the following week. There were meetings, studio sessions, conversations about image development and marketing strategies. Everyone was extremely enthusiastic about my potential. It felt like a dream coming true." Taylor described how, as a 19-year-old from a working-class background with no connections in the industry, the attention from such a successful label seemed like validation of his talent and hard work. "The contract was presented to me within 2 weeks of that first meeting," he continued. "It was described as a standard artist agreement, with industry-typical terms. I was told repeatedly that this was the same basic contract that all Bad Boy artists signed." "Did you have legal representation review this contract?" the prosecutor asked. Taylor's expression tightened slightly. "I was told that outside attorneys would complicate the process and potentially jeopardize the deal. Mr. Combs personally assured me that the label's lawyers had my best interests in mind, that we were family now, and that bringing in outside counsel would signal distrust." The prosecutor presented a document. "Is this the contract you signed?" Taylor identified it, explaining that he had been given less than 24 hours to review a 40-page legal document filled with terminology he didn't understand before signing. "I was 19 years old, living in a hotel paid for by the label, surrounded by their representatives, and being told this was my one shot at success," Taylor said quietly. No one explained that I was signing away my publishing rights, my master recordings, and essentially putting myself in a position where I could sell millions of records and still end up in debt to the label. The prosecutor methodically walked Taylor through the key provisions of the contract, highlighting clauses about recoupable expenses, marketing costs, and revenue splits. With each revelation, the predatory nature of the agreement became increasingly apparent. When did you begin to realize that this arrangement was problematic? The prosecutor asked. Taylor's response was measured but pointed. After my first album went platinum, I should have been financially secure. Instead, I was told I still owed the label over $1 million. I need to be very clear about something, Taylor said, his voice steady but intense. I've sold millions of records. I've had #1 singles. I've performed for sold-out crowds around the world. But, financially, for years, I lived check to check, dependent on whatever advances the label decided to provide. He glanced briefly at Diddy before continuing. Because no matter how successful my music became, the accounting always showed that I owed more. Taylor explained that his debut album sold over 2 million copies and produced 3 hit singles. By conventional understanding, this should have generated substantial royalties. When I asked to see detailed accounting, I was initially told it was being processed. Then I was told it was too complex for me to understand. Finally, I was handed a statement showing that despite the album's success, I had only paid off a fraction of my supposed debt to the label. The prosecutor displayed a financial statement on the courtroom screen. Is this the document you received? Taylor confirmed it was, pointing out the extensive list of recoupable expenses, studio time charged at rates far above industry standards, marketing costs that couldn't be verified, production expenses that seemed inflated, even charges for label parties and events he hadn't attended. The most disturbing part wasn't just the creative accounting, Taylor continued. It was what happened. When I started asking questions, he described how his concerns were initially dismissed with reassurances about the complex nature of the music business. When he persisted, the approach changed. Mr. Combs invited me to his home for what he called a family meeting. He was charming. At first, reminiscing about how far we'd come together, emphasizing how much the label had invested in my career. But when I continued pressing about the financial discrepancies, his demeanor changed completely. Taylor described how Diddy reminded him of other artists who had left Bad Boy and subsequently disappeared from the industry. How he emphasized his extensive connections throughout music, radio, television, and even beyond entertainment. He never explicitly threatened me, Taylor clarified. He didn't need to. The message was clear. My career existed at his pleasure, and challenging. The system could make that career vanish. The prosecutor presented another document, an email from Diddy to several executives discussing Taylor's questions about accounting. Never seen this before, Taylor said, reviewing it, but it confirms exactly what I experienced. The email, dated 2003, instructed executives to handle the Taylor situation by restructuring his debt calculation and reminding him of his contractual obligations. It specifically mentioned making an example to ensure other artists remained focused on music rather than business. Taylor continued, describing how after that meeting, his relationship with the label subtly but significantly changed. Studio time became less available. Marketing support for his second album was reduced. Radio promotion was delayed. It was never stated explicitly, but the correlation was unmistakable, Taylor explained. The more questions I asked, the more obstacles appeared in my career. He described how, despite these challenges, his second album still achieved significant commercial success, though not at the level of his debut. After that album, I received another accounting statement showing I now owed even more than before, Taylor said. When I compared the statements, I discovered that interest had been applied to my debt, and new categories of expenses had appeared retroactively. The prosecutor displayed both statements side by side, highlighting the discrepancies Taylor described. At this point, I hired an independent forensic accountant, someone with no connections to the industry, Taylor continued. I paid them personally, kept it completely confidential. Their conclusion was that based on verifiable sales and standard industry practices, I should have earned approximately $4.2 million from my first two albums. Instead, I had received about $185,000 in advances while accumulating a paper debt of over $2 million. The courtroom fell silent as the implications of this revelation settled over the jury. Taylor looked directly at Diddy. "This wasn't unique to me," he said firmly. "This was the business model." Taylor took a sip of water as the prosecutor guided him toward elaborating on the broader patterns he observed during his time at Bad Boy Records. The financial manipulation was just one component of a larger system, Taylor explained. There was an entire infrastructure designed to maintain control over artists beyond just contractual obligations. He described how the label systematically fostered dependency in multiple aspects of artists' lives, not just professionally, but personally. Housing, transportation, even personal relationships were monitored and often managed by label personnel, Taylor stated. New artists were encouraged to live in properties owned by Mr. Combs or his associates. Our movements were tracked under the guise of security or scheduling. Our personal teams, stylists, security, even in some cases romantic partners, were often selected by or connected to the label. The prosecutor displayed several employment agreements for Taylor's entourage members, his personal assistant, security team, and stylist. Each contained unusual reporting requirements, including obligations to provide regular updates about the artist's activities, associations, and conversations to label management. "I had no idea these provisions existed," Taylor said, reviewing the documents. "These were people I trusted with my daily life, and they were contractually required to report on me to the label." He explained how this surveillance created an environment where artists never felt completely free to express concerns or explore options outside the bad boy ecosystem. "The isolation was systematic," Taylor continued. "We were constantly reminded that the bad boy family was all we needed, that outsiders wouldn't understand our world, that loyalty to Mr. Combs was the path to continued success." Taylor described how artists who showed too much independence, whether creative, financial, or personal, often found themselves subtly sidelined. Release dates would be delayed, radio promotion would mysteriously underperform, opportunities would disappear. There was a clear pattern of which artists thrived within the system, he noted. Those who accepted the financial arrangement without question, who remained personally loyal to Mr. Combs, who participated in the label culture without reservation, they received the full marketing power of the bad boy machine. Those who pushed boundaries in any way experienced coincidental career obstacles. The prosecutor presented several internal communications discussing artists who had raised concerns, similar to Taylor's. The documents revealed explicit strategies to manage expectations, realign priorities, and in one case, make an example of an artist who had been particularly vocal about financial transparency. The most effective element of this system was how it was disguised as family, as mentorship, as protection in a difficult industry, Taylor explained. Mr. Combs presented himself as both father figure and business visionary. He emphasized how he was shielding us from industry predators, how his tough approach was preparing us for the realities of the music business. Taylor described how this framing made it particularly difficult for young artists to recognize the manipulation. When you're 19 or 20 years old, coming from environments with limited opportunities, having someone like Diddy tell you he's looking out for you, someone whose success is visible, who appears to represent everything you aspire to, the power imbalance is enormous. Questioning his methods feels like ingratitude, like failing to respect someone who gave you a chance. He paused, his expression somber. It took me years to recognize that what was presented as protection was actually control, that what was framed as mentorship was exploitation, and that what was called family was really ownership. The court took a brief recess, then reconvened with Taylor returning to the stand. His composure remained intact, but there was a visible shift in his energy as the prosecutor moved toward the circumstances of his departure from Bad Boy Records. Mr. Taylor, after releasing 3 successful albums with Bad Boy, you terminated your relationship with the label in 2008. What led to that decision? Taylor straightened slightly in his seat. By my 3rd album, I had begun building relationships with entertainment attorneys and financial advisors, independent of the label's ecosystem. I was careful to keep these connections private, knowing how previous questions about business matters had been received. He explained that through these independent advisors, he gained a clearer understanding of just how unusual his contract terms were compared to industry standards, and how systematically the accounting had been manipulated. But the final breaking point wasn't actually about my situation, Taylor said. It was about witnessing what happened to newer artists signing with the label. He described how in 2007 he observed the onboarding process for several new bad boy artists, young performers from backgrounds similar to his own, clearly overwhelmed by their sudden entry into the industry. I watched them being guided through the same process I had experienced, the same pressure to sign quickly without independent representation, the same promises about family and loyalty, the same contractual terms that would ensure they never saw fair compensation for their work. Taylor described one particular incident that crystallized his decision. A young artist, barely 18 years old, had expressed hesitation about certain contract provisions. Taylor witnessed Diddy's response firsthand. Mr. Combs took this kid into his office privately. When they emerged about an hour later, the young man looked completely different, subdued, almost frightened. He signed the contract immediately, without asking any further questions. Taylor paused. Later that night, at a label event, this same artist pulled me aside and asked if I could loan him money for his mother's overdue rent. This, despite having just signed a contract that was publicly announced as a multi-million-dollar deal. When I asked what happened during his meeting with Diddy, he just shook his head and said, "I can't talk about it. Just need to focus on the music." Taylor described how this interaction forced him to confront his own role in perpetuating the system. I realized I had become part of the problem. By remaining with Bad Boy, despite knowing how it operated, I was lending credibility to a system that would continue exploiting young artists. My success, limited as it was financially, was being used to attract new talent into the same exploitative structure. The prosecutor nodded. And what actions did you take based on this realization? I consulted with an attorney about my options for terminating my contract, Taylor replied. I was informed that legally challenging the agreement would likely result in years of expensive litigation that I couldn't afford. The alternative was buying my way out of the contract, essentially paying for my freedom with money I'd earned but never received. Taylor explained that he liquidated personal assets, borrowed from family, and negotiated a settlement that allowed him to exit his contract early. The cost was substantial, not just financially, but professionally. Part of the separation agreement included extensive non-disparagement clauses and confidentiality provisions, he said. I was effectively prevented from discussing my experiences publicly. Additionally, I understood, though it was never stated explicitly, that exercising my right to leave would likely mean the end of my mainstream music career. "And what happened to your career after leaving Bad Boy Records?" the prosecutor asked. "Exactly what I expected," Taylor replied. "Doors closed, opportunities disappeared. Industry contacts suddenly became unreachable. I released independent music, but without major distribution or promotion, my commercial viability declined rapidly." He looked directly at the jury. "I chose freedom over fame, knowing the cost, but I never regretted that choice." The prosecution concluded their direct examination, and Diddy's lead defense attorney approached for cross-examination. His manner was aggressively confident as he attempted to reframe Taylor's testimony as the bitter perspective of a failed artist. "Mr. Taylor, you've presented quite a dramatic narrative about your time with Bad Boy Records," the attorney began, his tone dismissive. "But isn't it true that your career declined not because of some conspiracy, but simply because your music stopped resonating with audiences?" Taylor remained composed. "My third album with Bad Boy went gold and produced a top 10 single despite minimal promotional support. The market response indicated continued audience interest. What changed wasn't the quality of my music or public reception. It was access to the infrastructure of the industry." The defense attorney shifted tactics, presenting sales figures showing a downward trajectory across Taylor's 3 albums. "These numbers tell a different story, don't they? Each album sold less than the previous one. Isn't that the real reason behind your departure? You were becoming less valuable to the label?" "Those figures are accurate but lack context," Taylor responded evenly. "My debut received the full promotional power of Bad Boy. Prime release date, maximum marketing budget, priority radio promotion. With each album, as I asked more questions about the business side, those resources were strategically reduced. The declining sales were a result of diminishing support, not diminishing quality or audience interest." The courtroom tensed as the defense attorney's questioning grew more pointed, suggesting that Taylor's testimony was motivated by resentment over a failed career and financial difficulties. "Isn't it more accurate to say you're here because your independent career never achieved the success you had with Bad Boy, and you're looking for someone to blame besides yourself?" Taylor took a moment before responding, his composure unwavering. "I knew the professional consequences when I left. I chose truth over continued commercial success. I've lived modestly but sustainably as an independent musician and producer for the past 15 years. I'm not in financial distress. I'm not seeking a comeback or publicity. I was subpoenaed to testify, and I'm doing so truthfully." The defense strategy pivoted again, this time focusing on the standard nature of music industry contracts. "The arrangements you've described, recoupable expenses, marketing costs, revenue splits, these are standard throughout the music industry, aren't they? Bad Boy's practices weren't unique." "Certain structures are indeed common," Taylor acknowledged. "What was unusual was the scale of the financial manipulation, the deliberate isolation of artists from independent advisors, and the coordinated efforts to prevent questions or transparency. The issue wasn't just the contract terms themselves, but the systematic environment that prevented artists from understanding or challenging those terms." Throughout the increasingly aggressive questioning, Taylor maintained his composure, acknowledging limitations in his perspective when appropriate, but standing firm on the core substance of his testimony. In a final attempt to undermine his credibility, the defense attorney produced several photographs of Taylor at industry events years after. Leaving Bad Boy, including images showing seemingly cordial interactions with Diddy. These don't appear to be the actions of someone who felt victimized or exploited. How do you explain maintaining friendly relations with Mr. Combs if your experience was as negative as you claim? Taylor looked at the photos, then directly at Diddy for the first time since cross-examination began. Survival, he said simply. The music industry is small. Mr. Combs's influence is extensive. Public confrontation would have eliminated what remained of my career entirely. Those photos show a professional understanding that certain appearances needed to be maintained, regardless of private realities, he continued, his voice steady. But more importantly, those photos show something else. They show the power imbalance that defined my entire relationship with Bad Boy Records. Even years after leaving, even after fulfilling all contractual obligations and paying for my contractual freedom, I still had to navigate around Mr. Combs's influence, still had to manage his perception of me to protect what remained of my career. Taylor turned back to the defense attorney. That reality, the need to maintain appearances with someone who exploited you because their power over your livelihood extends far beyond any formal business relationship, that is precisely what this case is about. The defense had no further questions. When Marcus Taylor finally stepped down from the witness stand after more than 4 hours of testimony, the courtroom atmosphere had transformed entirely. What had begun as a procedural day focused on financial documentation had become perhaps the most significant session of the entire trial. Diddy sat rigid at the defense table, his usually expressive face now locked in a mask of controlled tension. His legal team huddled in urgent consultation, their concern evident in their hurried whispers and troubled expressions. For the first time in the proceedings, the defense appeared genuinely shaken. The prosecution had achieved a crucial breakthrough: testimony that connected individual allegations into a coherent business practice, explained through the authentic voice of someone who had experienced it directly. Taylor hadn't just shared his personal grievances. He had methodically exposed the operational mechanics of exploitation that allegedly defined Bad Boy Records' approach to artist management. Outside the courthouse, reaction was immediate and intense. Music industry publications issued breaking news alerts. Social media platforms filled with clips from courtroom sketches and commentary from legal analysts. Former Bad Boy artists were suddenly inundated with interview requests, their previously dismissed complaints now viewed through a new lens of credibility. Taylor himself left through a side entrance, declining to make any statements to the assembled press. His attorney issued only a brief comment. Mr. Taylor testified truthfully to facts within his personal knowledge. He has no further public comment at this time. The impact within the music industry was seismic. Entertainment attorneys reported receiving calls from artists seeking contract reviews. Several major labels released statements affirming their commitment to financial transparency and artist advocacy. Industry organizations announced plans for educational initiatives focused on helping new artists understand their contractual rights. Most significantly, other former Bad Boy artists began coming forward. Some publicly, others through anonymous statements through attorneys. Many echoed Taylor's descriptions of financial manipulation, systematic control, and professional retaliation for questioning the established order. For Diddy, the strategic challenge was unprecedented. Unlike allegations that could be dismissed as personal vendettas or isolated incidents, Taylor's testimony had exposed systematic business practices documented in Bad Boy's own records. Financial statements, contractual language, and internal communications now took on new significance as potential evidence of deliberate exploitation rather than standard industry practice. Legal experts noted that the implications extended beyond the current charges. What we heard today potentially opens the door to civil litigation from numerous former artists, one entertainment attorney commented to waiting cameras. The statute of limitations for fraud can be extended when evidence suggests deliberate concealment of financial information, which is precisely what this testimony alleged. As Day 15 of the trial concluded, the judge issued additional instructions to the jury about evaluating expert testimony regarding industry practices, suggesting that Taylor's account had significantly altered the framework through which the case would be evaluated. The trial would continue, but the narrative had fundamentally changed. What had been portrayed by the defense as isolated allegations against a successful entrepreneur was now framed as evidence of a systematic business model built on the deliberate exploitation of young talent, a model that Taylor's testimony had exposed from the inside. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for continuing coverage of this developing story. Turn on notifications to make sure you never miss any updates as this landmark case continues to unfold.